Well, India has been quite the buzz this year in Davos. The India story has always been fairly resilient over here, but this year we see several Indian ministers over here. We see India lounges, top businesswomen, businessmen over here, and a really pitched effort at trying to bring in investment into our country. Joining us now to talk not just about Davos this year and the India story, but also about some of the key trends that he sees going forward in the Indian economy over, let's say, the next 1 year or so. Joining us now, Mr. N. Venkatram. He is the CEO of Deloitte India. Thanks very much, Mr. Venkatram, for being with us.
Thank you.
So there is a general sense of optimism over here. I mean, it's quite obvious. There's a lot of effort at trying to seek business for India. But going forward, in your experience or in your belief, three top trends that you see appearing in the Indian economy in, let us say, the next 1 year or so.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. And, when you walk down the main street, it is India all around, is it not?
Right. It certainly is.
Yes,
perhaps more than I've seen in quite a few years.
Absolutely. So it was very nice on that. Well, on a lighter note, I mean, I'm starting with RRR these days because that's what won us the awards. And if you really look at the fact that resilience is really the main theme for us here at Davos, right? Even when the Economist report came out yesterday, yes, I think it really highlights the fact that India is very resilient as an economy. And so therefore, when I look at three trends that come out, I would say that maybe let's move beyond an hour and talk about the RST to say that sustainability, climate is certainly a theme on which India is very strong and we can work extremely well on and lead in the world as well. And T is talent and technology. Because both, I think, in the areas of talent and technology, India has an enormous amount to offer in the years to come. And therefore, when I talked about resilience, for example, today the main topic that people talk about is supply chains, right? To say that we can be on the global value chains,
yes,
and how India can contribute. That's one piece of the story. But with the intersection of technology, Industry 4.0 and the like, and the fact that there's so many new technologies coming up, whether it is the use of drones, whether it is space tech, etc., and even semiconductors.
Yes.
When we're thinking in terms of semiconductors out of India, there's also semiconductor design.
Right.
So therefore, I say this confluence of technology and talent is also going to be a very big driver in the changes that are going to come. So I say RS&T, whatever is required for global resilience.
RS&T, 3 points over there.
Sustainability.
Let's talk about some of the potential sunrise areas. Now, you've identified a few of them. Semiconductors, the fact that India trying to invest heavily in the semiconductor space, move away from countries like Taiwan, which have done brilliantly in that area. What are some of the other sunrise areas? And let's talk about semiconductors as well.
Well, I'm not necessarily an expert, so I mean, that's the caveat I put up front. But if I were to look at semiconductors, for example, right, you do know of the CHIP Act that has come in the US and the enormous amount of money that's being put behind it. Yes, in India, the government is also backing, has also put aside a significant amount of money from our perspective. But we need to analyze it a little deeper and say, where do we want to play? We are not looking in terms of manufacture of the machinery, you're looking more in terms of the chips itself. Within that, there are so many areas. I mean, are you going to look at the chips which are over 10 years old and say what sort of replacement has to be done? Are you looking at smaller, bigger? Are you looking at, for the OEMs? There is also now a new trend which is coming in semiconductor in terms of replacing silicon with other metals, for example. So
gallium nitride.
Yes. So, I mean, I don't think we can play in all these areas. So I think we've got to choose. And one of the places where I think we can choose is the storage on the chip itself. I mean, the design piece of it. The only trouble with that is it doesn't sound that exciting because it doesn't get you the billions that you seek. But certainly I do think whether it's chip design or manufacture, maybe not as high-end as you would expect in the initial years, but we need to make that start. It's also a question of dependency. I mean, in a fractured world, which is the theme at Davos, I think it's very important that in any area where we require security, whether it's food security, defense, or the like, or even for our own trade security, I think that we need to get into certain areas and invest. And a lot of this, you have to look at the outcomes which are in the longer term, not necessarily just short term.
You're talking about the fragmented world being a concept that people are talking about over here, the need to end all of that. We're in the middle of a couple of crisis points. We haven't come out of the pandemic as yet at a global level. There's a Ukraine crisis as well, which is continuing to take place. To what extent do you expect these to continue to have and impact on factors which affect India?
I think a lot of them affect India. And I think it actually, I mean, I'm not saying to the smile because I'm being respectful, but I think it also affects us very positively. So say when you talk about reduction of costs or curtailing costs, or you will find necessarily there'll be a lot more offshoring into India. When you look at innovation, when you're looking at R&D, the hubs are based out of India. Even today, if you look at the global capability centers we have, which employ, I think, close to 9 million people, and there are about 1,300 of these centers, many of these actually are into R&D and design. So I would expect that a lot of work from Europe and the US, arguably, would still move into India in these next 2 years as well.
Sustainability is the other big focus over here.
Yes.
So talk us through India. We've got incredible goals as far as sustainability and climate is concerned. But how do you see that actually shaping up?
Well, you have to deal with the usual skepticism, also with the fact that you are a growth economy, you are looking at getting to 5 trillion. There is absolutely no doubt that your consumption is going to be higher. The pressures on you to invest, you know, when you look at returns on investment, when you look at sources of funds, the pressure will always be there to say, how do you balance it? So I really think that when you look at reform or even growth in terms of the actions we take on sustainability, we require to very carefully consider what we do on financing of green assets, for example. And this is something I think that there are people on the job looking at.
That's a key issue.
Because already we don't have a deep enough bond market.
No.
We are also looking now in terms of green bonds. The question is, will these be really immensely successful, or will it just, you know, settle at $12-15 billion? I mean, what we really need is much, much more investment than that. Because as you know, to get to 5 trillion, you need $8 trillion of capital outlay.
There's also the infusion of green technology, which is essential going forward, green hydrogen, for example. And you alluded to the fact that who's going to pay for a lot of what we require. And this is a debate which has been going on around the world for several years now. How do you see this progressing for India and our interests?
I think India is very, very resolute on the path of getting onto green hydrogen. And I think that's good for us. I think that particularly on the EV side, I think almost a third of the vehicles that will be manufactured by 2030 will really be out of India. But the sensitive point as to who pays, I honestly think that, you know, sometimes you can't change nature. That eventually it will still be the developing countries that will pay. No one else is going to pay for you, however much you talk about self-righteousness. Self-righteousness gets you that far and no further. So eventually we will end up paying for it. But I do hope that with forums where we are taking a lead, such as the G20 and B20, that at least these are put on the table. Nobody is really looking for a decision to get taken or resolution of the issue. But certainly a lot of what we are doing is something that I think is good diplomacy. I forgot to mention in my opening remarks about the India stack, for example. So if you just look at the India stack, take UID, for example, and the way in which it completely, created financial inclusion. It also helped a lot of companies to use that system to grow their businesses. Now you're looking in terms of what happens on distribution. For the MSME sector, we are looking at what happens on credit. And these are all institutionalized. I mean, the way they've been built, they can also be rolled out to other countries as well.
So digitization, basically.
So I think the whole digital infrastructure that India is building, in a sense, I would say, is a measure that is a counter, if I can exaggerate, to say a Belt and Road project. Where you actually create a Belt and Road to say that you're my friend, and then, he ends up having to pay you for it.
But since you've said Belt and Road, I must ask you, because this is interesting. Do you see a lot of business coming increasingly to India in terms of manufacturing from China? I mean, we've seen Apple and them coming over here. And is this something which is going to last, or is it linked to China's problems with COVID at the moment?
It will last, but the reality is you require what I call anchor tenants. You require a couple of the large companies to come, stay, and talk the India story.
And where are we with that?
Well, there's another T I didn't talk about, right, since I'm on alphabets, and that is trust. India has got a very long way on trust. I mean, if you look at where we were a few years ago and where we are today, I think we've done well on trust. Having said that, foreign companies, particularly when they come into India, also carry the baggage of history. You still get people who talk about retrospective, though retrospective for us was thrown in the dustbin a long time ago. They still remember some of the unpleasant cases of the past.
Huh.
A lot of reform has taken place in India. Our own surveys, our talking to clients, reveals that many people don't really know about it.
Right.
So we've got to really go on a trust campaign to build more trust, eventually to demonstrate to these companies that come in with their money, with their technology, and use
Ease
our
of doing
talent,
business is real.
that ease of business is doing well, but more importantly, we will give you a stable environment, not just from the stability that our democracy has, but also from the fact that you will not have vagaries in laws, regulations that, don't tamper with your sacrosanct business plans, which have, 5 to 10 years when you actually come out with the investment. Because their greatest nervousness is, I invest on a certain basis and certain premise and projections, and 2 years down the road, somebody throws a spanner in the works. We've just got to prove that that won't happen anymore.
All right. Well, that's a good...
And the intent is there.
That's a great note to end this. The intent is over there. Ease of business has to be more than just rhetoric. Perhaps it already is, but the world needs to know that better. Thanks very much, sir, for
Thank
speaking
you.
to us.
Bye-bye.
Lovely chatting with you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much indeed.